Hello and welcome to my review of the newly released TSW3. In this video I will be talking about all three routes in the core package, ending with my overall thoughts on the game itself. Spirit of Steam will not be covered, as it's only in the deluxe edition of the game. Okay, so as per usual, DTG only covered the US, UK and Germany for their three main routes. In this case we have Cajon Pass, Schnellfahrstrecke Kassel to Würzburg, and an extended Southeastern High Speed. Personally, I don't understand why Cajon Pass, or any US heavy freight route, was included alongside two high speed routes. Couldn't they have done an extended Boston Sprinter with the Acela Express or something? Regarding the German route, I honestly think it's pretty disappointing and underwhelming, especially given just how much hype DTG generated for TSW3. Whilst it's good to see them finally doing routes longer than 100 miles, 115 in this case, the route is very linear and only has three stations, namely Kassel-Wilhelmshöhe, Fulda, and Würzburg Hauptbahnhof. And due to its linearity, you can really only drive one kind of service, that being high speed with the ICE 1 or ICE 3 trains. Speaking of which, the ICE 3 in this pack is just copied over from the Hauptstrecke München to Augsburg add-on, complete with that distinctive green stripe around the front, although in my opinion the green stripe ruins the appearance of the train. Personally, I would have preferred to see the BR411 or ICE T included, but the ICE 1 is still a welcome addition to the game. Besides the ICE 1 and ICE 3, the Kassel to Würzburg route also includes the DB BR185-2 electric locomotive. This wouldn't be an issue if we hadn't already had this exact same locomotive included with at least two previous routes, namely Ruhr-Sieg Nord and Main-Spessartbahn. I mean, come on DTG, surely you lot could have included something actually new to the game, for once, instead of just reusing the BR185-2 over and over again. I'll take a quick break from the review to show the devs some of the German engines they could include in future routes, instead of the same old BR185. And those are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what Germany has to offer, and that's not even getting into the myriad of German steam engines they could make. By the way, that blue engine at the end may have looked like a BR185, but that's actually a diesel variant called the BR285. As for the driving experience on Kassel to Würzburg, I honestly got bored of it after just one trip. Like I said, there's only three stations on this route, and most of the time you're dipping in and out of tunnels or crossing tall viaducts. Granted, that's what I expected from a dedicated high-speed line, especially if my experience on the Marseille to Avignon route is anything to go by, but it can get a bit tiresome when there's over 30 minutes between stops. Southeastern High Speed is a little better in terms of linearity, or lack thereof. Originally this route only went from London St Pancras to Faversham, with no Sheerness branch because for some reason DTG thought it was a good idea to leave it out. For reference, this original add-on is just a remake of the London to Faversham High Speed route in TS Classic, except that one did come with a Sheerness branch. This extended version has the High Speed 1 coverage going all the way to Ashford International, and for some reason the North Kent line coverage was extended to Dartford as well. I mean sure, it's good to have more stations to visit, but why in heaven's name was the Sheerness branch still left out? Surely it's not too much to ask to have an extra 7 miles in the 3-car Class 375 or 466 networker for that matter. And don't get me started on the omission of the Medway Valley line as well. Probably goes without saying, but DTG really confuses me when it comes to what they do and don't include in a route add-on. You want good examples of questionable route choices? Just look at the LIRR and Harlem line add-ons. And another thing, why was the third rail line between Faversham and Ashford left out? In real life, Southeastern sometimes runs circular services with their 395 Javelins, in which they run down HS1 to Ashford and back up to London via the third rail lines or vice versa. Not to mention they didn't take the opportunity to add the Ashford to Eastbourne section, which would have linked up with the East Coastway add-on and required the inclusion of the Class 171 Turbostar. Talk about missed opportunities. As for what motive power you do get with this pack, it's the same as the original TSW2 version. Specifically you get the Class 395 Javelin and Class 375/9 Electrostar. By the way, the 375/9 is that variant with the weird 3x2 seating. You also get the Class 465/9 Networker, because why would DTG bother adding multiple variants of these classes when one will do, to represent the North Kent Line commuter services? Though I think they could have added the Thameslink Class 700 as well. Moving on to Cajon Pass, we find a route that's yet another remake of one we previously had in TS Classic. In this case, Cajon Pass was actually one of the original KiwiRail Simulator routes. And indeed, this one is quite long, running for 85 miles from San Bernadino to Barstow in the state of California. As for the included motive power, you get the E&D SD40-2 and a General Electric ES44C4 in BNSF colours. And it's a good job DTG and BNSF sorted out their licensing deal, otherwise we probably wouldn't have got this add-on outside the US. Now I know this might sound silly, but I wish we had Metrolink locomotives in rolling stock at San Bernardino, as the station is served by Metrolink trains in real life. To be brutally honest, I don't really care for these US heavy freight routes in TSW. They're often too long for my liking and they take ages to complete. It doesn't help that these trains are often very long, heavy, slow off the mark and hard to control. But in saying that, there's bound to be people who do enjoy these routes, and more power to those who do. Personally, I would have preferred it if Dovetail had done something like the Music City Star line from Nashville to Lebanon in Tennessee. Granted, that route's not even 40 miles long, but it does see both passenger and freight services, as the track is owned by the Nashville and Eastern Railroad. Not to mention the relaxed operating environment for the F40PH locomotives, in stark contrast to their time with Amtrak. Thinking back to Cajon Pass, I'm slowly taking a liking to this desert scenery, certainly on the section between Barstow and Victorville at least. And because this pack features BNSF locomotives, it reminds me of the Marias Pass route in TS Classic, although the GEVO that you get in that route is the ES44DC rather than the ES44C4. Something I like doing on this route is pottering around the yard in Barstow and taking down locomotive numbers. And whilst doing this, I've noticed a couple of ES44C4s that have the same numbers as KiwiRail's DSG shunter locomotives, with the common numbers that I've found so far being 3251, 3264, and 3277. Besides those three routes, there's a few other things worth talking about in this game. Firstly, dynamic weather. This is a feature loads of people have wanted for ages, and it's about time it was implemented. What this means is that the weather will realistically change as you're driving a locomotive or walking around. So you could start off as like a nice and sunny day, but then very suddenly it turns into a horrible rainstorm. Next there's the training centre, which to me just looks like an updated version of the ancient test track route in TS Classic. Whilst I don't really understand why this was added, it's still fun to mess around on from time to time. Indeed, the first time I loaded up this route, I got into class 375 and opened the throttle to full power, then bailed out of the cab and ended up with a runaway train. So overall, what do I think of Train Sim World 3? Well, there's a reason I call it the debatably necessary sequel to TSW2, because I don't think there was any point in DTG putting out an entirely new game when there aren't many differences between the versions. Sure, TSW3 has longer routes, about time, dynamic weather, again, about time, and a training centre thingy, but other than that I can't really think of many outstanding differences. And why it's taken so long to get routes longer than 100 miles is anyone's guess. Indeed, from what I gather, a lot of people aren't happy about this quote-unquote new game. It sort of feels like you're just buying TSW2 all over again. And surely it's not DTGB money hungry again. Perish the thought. And if you've got any thoughts on the situation, and just TSW3 as a whole, feel free to leave them in the comments. So with that being said, thank you all for watching and I hope you've enjoyed this review of TSW3.